You're in the wrong place, amigo. Come on, let's get out of here. Vamos, andale. Your money's no good here. Come on, let's go. You too.
Hold on a minute.
Yes? What do you want?
Now, look here, Sarge. Sure appreciate it if you're a little more polite to these people.
Oh, you would you?
I'm Vic Benedict. Your neighbor, you might say.
Does that give you special privileges? That there papoose down there. His name Benedict, too?
It is.
All right, forget I asked you. Now, you just go back over there and sit down, and we ain't gonna have no trouble. But this bunch here is gonna eat somewhere else. All right, come on, let's go.
Take care.
Come on, you two. Soon. You're out of line, mister.
I love the Mexican people. I love the Mexican people.
Hi, and welcome to the QCC Presents Ward 13 with John Hopwood. My co-host tonight is Dr. Kevin Emery, and our guest is Ambassador George Bruno. And we're going to talk about immigration law.
Okay.
Because I asked you to be on, I contacted you, because at the Universal Unitarian Church, and I don't think we want to give up details, and I don't want to speak for them, but I signed a card saying that I would support the sanctuary movement. And because I don't want to talk about that specifically, but because I'm not the one to be a spokesman for that. But
well, I understand that there are at least 3 or 4 churches now in New Hampshire willing to provide sanctuary for persons threatened with deportation. One in the Upper Valley, I think Meriden, one in Dover, and another in the city of Manchester.
Right.
And they are getting set up and operational.
Now, I'm not familiar with this, so I'm going to ask, are they all Unitarian Universalist churches, or are they of varying denominations? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that.
Different denominations.
I believe so.
I
the
know
one in Manchester is Universal, Unitarian Universal.
And there's, but they have the support. There's a Catholic priest. I don't remember his name. See, I'm a Congregationalist, and so I don't know. There's a church towards the end of Elm Street, the south end of Elm Street, and he's a monk, and he is involved in, I'd say, a righteous protest against the current administration's immigration laws. But
Right.
I'm just here, and I just thought it was my moral duty. I was at the church, and I stayed for a discussion of it, and they passed around cards, and I could help publicize it. But see, that's a dual sword in this type of climate, So that's why I can't speak about it. First of all, I don't know enough about it, and I can't take the presumption of speaking for it. But I thought it was my moral duty to take part in providing sanctuary. As I told Ambassador Bruno earlier, I was involved with 2 women who would have been called illegal immigrants and were caught in situations similar to immigrants these days. One came from a country that was considered the evil empire, part of what was it?
The axis of
The
evil.
axis of evil, Iran. She was an
Right.
Armenian Christian from Iran, brought here as a 12-year-old. Her sister never thought of naturalizing her, and she never did. Then you have the 2003 war. She must have been in her early 30s. And then she had to go through that. And then I was involved with a Russian who overstayed her student visa. And at the time, Putin was getting ornery, and suddenly Russia was back on the blacklist. And they both they went to immigration lawyers, and neither one had a particularly easy time.
Well, if they didn't have an easy time then, it is much worse now.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
The bureaucracy at USCIS, which is Customs and Citizenship and Immigration Services, the stepped-up activity of ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, particularly in the city of Manchester on Chestnut Street, the federal building. They've stepped up their act quite substantially. And so this is not a good time for immigrants living in the United States particularly. We have a suit right now pending in the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston, challenging the president's authority to deport a Manchester resident who's been a resident for 15 years, who served as a confidential informant for ICE, for FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, DEA, and other law enforcement, and did that for eight years, and then after it was over, requested what was promised to him, which was to be allowed to remain in the United States, and they acted as if they didn't know him, despite the fact that they promised that they would allow him to remain in the U.S. They had allowed him to get a driver's license, allowed him to have work authorization. He bought a home. He has a U.S. citizen daughter who, by the way, was employed by Homeland Security. He has a wife with a green card, and he showed up at the ICE office, as is his requirement on a monthly basis, to sign up, and they told him to come back in 30 days with a plane ticket to leave the country to go to Brazil. This is the new 30-30 rule that seems to have been adopted.
What's 30-30?
Which is you report every 30 days, and at some point, suddenly and unknown to you, you'll get an order from ICE to report back in 30 days with a plane ticket, and then leave 30 days after that.
Now, they actually had a case in Chicago, I think it was, where a guy who had been here upstanding citizen, owned a business, had done a lot of stuff, and had been here for like more than 20 years, I believe. But he was on this 30 thing, and they said he had 30 days to get a plane ticket, and he was trying to sell his house, and he was trying to follow it, though he was still fighting to stay here. And
Sounds like the Japanese in World War II.
but they came
When
like
they-
10 or 15 days into the 30 days, even though he had a plane ticket, and deported him on the spot, not letting him finish, with
Right.
no justifiable, that I ever saw, reason.
So,
I just meant the Japanese. Remember after Pearl
Right, the
Harbor, there was an
internment
executive
camps.
order, and they had the
Right.
internment camps.
so we can make a little news here. Yesterday, my partner, Bob McDaniel, who lives in Meredith, and he's a lawyer, we filed suit in federal court in Concord with one of the named parties, President Trump, to enjoin the President, the Attorney General, the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and other federal officials from deporting a gentleman who lives in Manchester, who's lived here for over 30 years.
Oh, so this is a separate case.
This is a separate case. No criminal record.
30 years.
No criminal record. Again, he has a driver's license, work authorization, has his own home,
Paid
has
taxes.
paid taxes, is married to a woman with a green card, has a daughter who's an American citizen who is sponsoring him for a green card, and which she's perfectly capable of doing. And we believe that recent filing for sponsorship for the green card is what triggered the ICE to initiate this 30-30-30 procedure. In fact, he went into the ICE office on Chestnut Street to do his monthly report, was told that the person that he was to report to was not there. Could he come back in a couple of days? So he came back to report, and was told that he had 29 days to get a plane ticket and then leave the country. And in the meantime, they put an ankle bracelet on his leg
Jeez.
so that they could track him with GPS.
This is
Out of the blue, totally unexpected. And in the meantime, his petition is pending for his green card, but of course he'll never get to
Yeah.
the application because he'll be out of the country and will be ineligible to return for 10 years.
Is there any
So we filed this lawsuit
Yeah.
in federal court in Concord, saying it's a violation of due process. You can't
Which
kick-
he has, even as an so-called
That's right.
illegal immigrant, he has due process.
You can't remove a person, without notice and giving them an opportunity to respond, and particularly, you have to ask yourself why this kind of person is being targeted.
Well, that's my question. Has anybody looked at, besides the fact that they are
Undocumented.
undocumented, I
Yes.
don't like to use the word illegal, undocumented aliens, is there any other common denominator that has started to show up in any of these
Well, the
cases?
Yes. Under the Obama administration, a series of criteria was established that represented priorities that ICE should go after. Should go after people who had criminal records. Should go after newly arrived persons
Right,
in
no
the,
roots.
who just came over the border. It should go after persons who have engaged in domestic violence, and it's go after people that pose security risk. Those were the priorities. And leaving all of the other law-abiding, tax-paying, undocumented persons aside. When the Trump administration came in, it abolished all the priorities and, in effect, established that everyone was a priority. And so the Trump administration is attempting to demonstrate its muscle by promoting the wall on the Mexican border and by increasing its statistics
Right.
to show that they're getting really tough on immigration. We're going to make the United States safe again.
So you go after somebody who's high profile too. Like we're talking about these people, that's one thing. But when I was in Texas, stationed in the Army in the 80s, I remember I had a friend who was Mexican American, and it was about the time, it was just before the Simpson bill. Remember that immigration bill during the Reagan era? We were talking about her father. She says,
Well, that was the amnesty bill
Right.
under Reagan.
He had been here 30 years, but he was still terrified to come forward, even though they're offering amnesty. Now, you attack these people like somebody with a business, or somebody here 30 years or 15 years. You are sending a message into the immigrant community. I would think it's a one to terrorize them in a way. That way, you cut back on any you cut down on political activity. Because I've lived in California where with undocumented advocates and people that are undocumented would have come forward and engaged in the political process. Just as now in California, people have come forward. Well, I'm undocumented. I got a PhD or this. I was a child brought here. So what I'm hearing is like a political prosecution or a persecution.
Well, it's punishment. You take, for example, the person that our firm is representing who served as a confidential informant.
Right. Putting his life in danger.
Putting his life in danger, being put in a jail cell with the very traffickers that brought him to the United States. And he is required to report to Chestnut Street every 30 days. Now, we have a stay, an injunction with the First Circuit Court of Appeals that he cannot be deported until the appeal process has run. Today, we filed our brief in the case in the First Circuit in Boston. The government has 30 days in which to file its brief. Then we get another couple of weeks to file a counter brief. Then a argument schedule is set up, and then the justices retire after that to write the decision. Well, this process is going to take at least to Labor Day and quite possibly to the end of the year. So they still require him to report every 30 days, despite the fact that prior to them targeting him, he was reporting once a year. Once a year. But they require him to come back every 30 days, and it's, I see it as a waste of government money to be churning the mill when you're really not doing anything. They can't deport the gentleman. They had the custom of requiring him to come in at 9 o'clock in the morning. You're not allowed into the federal building. You have to stand outside in the cold until 9 o'clock, despite the fact that the building is open at 7 o'clock. They won't allow people to stand inside and get warm. Some kind of federal rule. So they typically required him to come in at 9 o'clock. Now they're requiring him to come in at 10:45.
Does he work? He has a
Yes,
job?
he works. So now he has to take half a day off in order to accommodate the ICE officers who we believe are acting in a punitive fashion just to tell him that, we know you have an injunction, but we're going to make it as tough on you as possible. We're going to make you lose work. We're going to make you stand outside.
I was at the National Whistleblower Center in Washington. One of their big targets was FBI whistleblower. I don't mean target, but they represented FBI whistleblowers. And anybody that doesn't believe that the government can be, you're saying, punitive. I could use several other words off air. They can be pretty vicious in their harassment. I don't know why. I was in the Army. I don't know if it's an institutional thing.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Well, remember that sooner or later, every institution's only job is to preserve and protect the institution, and it no longer serves the vision or mission statement of the organization. It basically just does whatever it does to grab and keep power for the institution. What you're talking about is, to me, the case of power corrupts, and now you have these agents who may have felt like they had less power or were more powerless in the Obama administration, and now they're basically getting their leashes taken off to be attack dogs.
And Obama was replaced by a person that's advocated violence at the political campaign rallies and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, a fish rots from the head down, as they say. But
The ICE officers themselves are quite interesting and imposing figures. You wouldn't recognize one if you saw them on the street, because very often they're wearing dungarees and sneakers and hoodies, and they got a baseball cap on that's backwards, and they're maybe waiting outside your home to arrest you.
So now, how long have you been practicing immigration law?
Since I returned from my work at the State Department, so I've been doing it now for 18 years.
So you've been doing it for 18 years, and you were involved with state before that. And
State Department, Pentagon, and then prior to that, private practice in Manchester.
you were the ambassador to Belize, right? Former British Honduras.
Yes.
In your time in state and then in private practice, does this replicate any kind of cyclical relationship that this country has with immigration, or does this stand out as a thing all of its own? What's going on currently? Have we been here before?
We have been here before. We were here during the Reagan years, when at that time there were at least 3 million undocumented persons living in the United States. And during the Reagan years, of course, it was before the creation of Homeland Security, and
We had the INS.
you had the INS. And so there wasn't the kind of post 9/11 intensity that we see now for greater internal U.S. security.
Yeah,
But it had a positive ending in the sense that Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, did sign off on an amnesty package, and 3 million people were not deported. They were integrated into society, and by all accounts, the United States is a stronger nation because of it. The idea that if we have 10, 11, 12 million undocumented persons living in the United States right now, the idea of gearing up a deportation machine to remove them from society entails a lot of federal government spending, a lot of taxpayer resources, the removal of a lot of talent and skills from the United States, making us less competitive, an economy less dynamic, and in the end, doesn't really benefit the United States. We have to ask ourselves, why can't we deal with something very simple like the DACAs? The young people, the dreamers, the young people that were brought to the United States by their parents and who have gone to our schools, live in our neighborhoods, are contributing members to society. 800,000 to 1 million of them, perhaps more.
Right, the woman I was talking about who's here as a child, she has worked at, is she at Apple now or Microsoft? It goes from one to the other.
Yeah.
But suddenly they started going after Iranian immigrants, people in that axis of evil. And she, geez, 20 years after she'd been in the United States. When you know somebody that goes through this, and not just people like that, immigrants, undocumented immigrants from Mexico. I lived in California. The Russian was a restaurateur, undocumented laborers, too, can be harassed and exploited in a way that people really don't understand.
But I think swept under the rug is also the fact that legal immigration is becoming more and more difficult in the United States.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
We have something called an H-1B visa,
Right.
which is the professional visa. People with doctorate degrees and master's degrees, bachelor's degrees.
The Silicon Valley.
Or
was,
people, right,
talented.
computer programmers, engineers, doctors.
Doctors and nurses.
Yes, and they utilize this this visa. Well, on April 1st, the filing season will open to accept those kind of visa applications, and it will close on April 7th.
Say that again.
It will open on April 1st, and then it will close on April 7th for the rest of the year.
Now, historically, how long has that period been?
Well, 8 or 9 years ago, it was open year-round.
That's what I remember in California.
But then, under the Bush administration, the number of visas was reduced from 200,000 to 50,000. So now we have the prospect of 200,000 applications going in and 50,000 professionals being awarded the opportunity to apply, not to get the visa, to simply apply for the visa.
Oh.
And the other 150 being rejected because they didn't catch the lottery.
It's so ironic, yeah.
And so we have businesses that are that can't
That need
supply
the
the
certain type
talent
of labor, right?
for the businesses. I represent some Indian restaurants in the Boston area, for example. They can't find Indian master chefs to work in their restaurants, and the chef is the key person, of course.
Yeah.
And the restaurant then employs 30, 40, 50 other Americans. Well, without the chef, the pyramid collapses, and immigration is now saying, well, the chef is not a specialty occupation, despite the fact there are no culinary schools that I know of in the United States that teach how to blend Indian spices and make curries and the niceties of tandoori ovens.
Being a chef is, my father used to live near the Culinary Institute of America. It was not. It was never cheap to get a degree there. And when you come out with one of those degrees, you're very well.
Well, even the Culinary Institute in New York.
Yeah.
They don't have a course in South Indian cuisine. So one of my clients had to close down 2 restaurants because he couldn't staff them.
So they're not putting anybody out of work to bring the chef over here.
No, in fact, to bring the chef over employs more Americans.
So now, this may be an urban myth, and I'm trying to remember this, but there was a time, was there not, that if a certain dollar amount was invested in
$250,000, wasn't it? At one time.
There's something called an EB-5 visa.
Because they have it in the UK too, England. Yeah.
Yes. And if you invest $500,000 in a pre-packaged program approved by the Immigration Service, then you would be entitled to a green card. There's also another process by which if you invest $1 million anywhere in the United States, the 500,000 program is prepackaged and for targeted, underserved, impoverished communities. The $1 million is for anywhere in the United States. And in effect, you can buy a green card.
Yes, and so I find it very interesting that somehow the person who goes through and gets lots of education or gets really a specialty or is trying to escape a country that is known to be, violently aggressive to whatever they are, religion, orientation, whatever it may be, is going to bring in terrorists. But terrorist organizations that have access to millions of dollars could easily buy one of their people a green card by investing that money in the U.S. and slipping somebody in.
Well,
am I crazy here? Or?
Well, a little bit.
It's okay. I'm
That's why he's
asking.
on the show.
Tell
I'm
me.
even
5
crazier.
years ago, you could, or 8 or 9 years ago, you could file for the investment EB-5 visa and get it approved in a year. Now these visas under extreme vetting,
Right, extreme vetting.
the application period is taking 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
What about refugees? Because you were saying people is trying to escape. That's
Yeah.
the huge situation in Europe. Because one of my ex, she has relatives from her, who
Right.
she's married to now, in Syria, and the hellishness of getting out of Syria. And just an interesting aside, when Germany, she was her sister-in-law was given an apartment and everything because she's Druze. And they said, "Are you Muslim?" She said, "No, I'm Druze." And there's always a question whether that's true or not. If she'd said she was a Muslim, she wouldn't have been given that. But refugees, have they been impacted?
Refugees have been impacted under President Obama. The United States was sponsoring 80,000 refugees each year to resettle in the United States. He bumped it up to 120,000.
In a country of 310 million. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
The United States is, compared to other countries, is a minor player in the
Right.
refugee game. Sweden, Denmark, Germany are
And
all
America.
much larger players than the United States in helping people resettle. But a refugee is a person who has made their way to a United Nations refugee camp or location, and they fill out the paperwork for resettlement in another country.
Right, it's a status
The parallel to that is if a person arrives in the United States, they can apply for asylum. So the standards for asylum and refugee are identical, except one person is outside of the country and the other person is inside of the country. And the standard for being allowed to stay is whether or not a person has been or is threatened with persecution as a result of belonging to an identifiable group related to religion,
Right.
sex, ethnicity, or political beliefs.
The terrible thing about being a Russian was everybody's persecuted in Russia, unless you're part of an elite. Having to face going back to Russia, I was like, oh my God.
So, I just want to go back for a second, because I'm okay with being crazy. I've been called worse things. Actually,
Even
sometimes
today you were.
Yes, even today I was.
No, you weren't. Not today.
But, I mean, we have groups that are truly fanatics that hate everything we stand for. And they will be patient and take their time. So I don't understand why it's so crazy to think that even with the 3 or 4 year vetting process that you couldn't buy somebody a green card that his intent was to do damage. That somehow money, just money, makes you somehow fast forwarded in this process. I mean, I just don't think it's that crazy. I mean, yes, it's a longer game, but when we see some of the things that have happened, they were not played. They were not played as a short game. They were played as a longer game to wreak some kind, to do some kind of revenge or some kind of fanaticism against people that were not like them, whether it was here or in Europe
but you
or
could
whatever.
do anything.
You know,
you could land the boat in New
you're
York.
absolutely right, and your hypothesis is entirely plausible. But if you look at the violence that has occurred in the United States, for example, the Air Force officer in the Texas military base that I guess he was a major,
And he shot
and he
his comrades.
But
he was
and he came from Pakistan or some Middle Eastern country, and he was naturalized. He was radicalized in the United States.
Yes.
If you look at the school shootings, for example, these shooters are radicalized here at home. So yes, somebody could come in from another country as a mole, I suppose, and do violence. But that is not the pattern that is emerging.
No, and I can accept that it's not the pattern that's emerging. It's just, I think that, as always, we are a little more willing to look the other way if there's a buck that can be made along the way.
Well, if you look at the
You mean like the Saudis that were here that planned 9/11? Remember, there were Saudi nationals.
Yeah.
No, they didn't plan 9/11.
Who did?
Right. I thought you were talking about the ones that were allowed to leave after 9/11 occurred.
No, well, no, I'm not really talking
Yeah.
about them. I'm talking about the people that,
Yeah.
the ones that actually pulled it off.
Right. The ones we sent to Guantanamo.
No, I'm not even talking about them. I'm talking about the people that actually did 9/11.
Right. Right.
So,
I mean, they were here, but they're here. There was the Saudi royal, there were people from the royal family and everything here. That was the first priority. Remember, that's a whole nother thing. And, I don't want to talk about that because I was in the intelligence community. Not that I particularly know anything, but that's another can of worms. But I'm just saying, anybody, they're here. But who knows who's going to become it? When you made that argument, I thought you were going to say this. Well, that the millionaire coming here negates the argument about preventing poor people coming from here, because a millionaire could become a fanatic just as easily as somebody without any dough. But of course, I remember when I was still in the MI, and afterwards, there were all those reports that about terrorism was going to be created by poverty in countries. You know, it's an incubator. Places like Egypt and that, with the inequality of wealth and all that. So,
Is the inequality in wealth in Egypt any different than it is here anymore?
oh yeah, I would say so. But I don't know.
I would certainly say so.
Yeah, but
the-
that was going to be the play. That's why, and not just in Muslim countries, other countries, African places with the inequality. That
Yeah, but we have with each passing year seen a greater and greater inequality in the wealth distribution in this country.
yeah, and that
So
probably
where
will break,
are we headed?
that will break out like an Oklahoma City bombing with a bunch of rednecks. I would.
All right, I think
Although
we're
not just to
getting
use that.
a little afield here.
You're getting us off the
Uh,
field.
Well,
the,
right now it's an
of the
Austin
immig-
bombing because there's 5 of them
Yeah.
that have had
I don't
Yeah,
think-
But
yeah.
go ahead.
Well,
we live in
I
a free
just-
we live in a free society. People coming in and out. I was in London, a very nice neighborhood. You know, it's very cosmopolitan. You have people from Pakistan, Muslim. Everybody was getting along just fine in the neighborhood I was in. But once again, it was like a lower up, as they would say in England, a lower upper middle class neighborhood. But when you're in London or Los Angeles or places. Geez, I lived in California and Monterey. Everybody I met was from somewhere else because we had the language institute.
Where do you see immigration going, and how much effect can the person watching this show have in any of that?
I think immigration, like many other initiatives in the Washington atmosphere that we have now, is kind of stuck in the mud. The most I think we can hope for at this point is doing something about the Dreamers, the possibility that that legislation might pass. The president wants to eliminate something he calls chain immigration, which means
Families being reunited.
that families being reunited. That is that when one immigrant gets a green card and becomes an American citizen, then that American can then sponsor
Right.
their mother or their father, sort of like the way Melania Trump just recently sponsored her parents to resettle in the United States with green cards.
Melania Trump came here on a genius visa.
So.
Yeah. There were some jobs.
So under the president's proposal, he would close the door on what he just did and what his wife just did for her parents.
Maybe he's trying to get rid of his in-laws. They'll be forced to go back.
No, they're here.
No, once you get your green card, you're good to go.
2 of his wives, 3 wives are immigrants, proving
right.
that there are some jobs, Kevin, that Americans just don't want to do. But that's true. She came here as a model. There's that. I can't remember what the designation.
Yeah, it's an
For genius. Yeah.
EB1 visa.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, a person of extraordinary ability.
But see, you
But that would be the Indian chef to me, more so than a supermodel.
not if you're Donald Trump.
For a green card, yes. I've done many EB1 visas.
So that does if you're
they're-
like
they're
a
not-
lawyer or barrister, you'd have trouble getting.
Well,
in the
you
bar
have to
now.
be a person who is in the upper 5% of your game, who can get testimonials by your peers, who has published articles, has appeared in the media.
Great musicians are often get that.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Who have received awards and other recognitions, and so they're not the easiest visas to get.
You know, talking about Trump again, just going back, Trump's focused on mostly bashing Mexicans, and I'm not going to say And, you know, would you disagree? Or is it just, because of that with the wall? I realize that a great deal of the undocumented labor does come from Mexico. But he really seems to, we're talking about a hypocrite, but he's not targeting rich people coming over here or geniuses necessarily. He's going, once again, for like red meat, easy target to fire up his base. Which, that's
The wall, I think, is more of a symbol and a gesture.
Oh, yeah.
It turns out that more undocumented persons are leaving the United States than are entering the United States.
I know that,
at this point. So the idea of having a wall to prevent people from coming in when the traffic is going in the other direction doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
The other thing that doesn't make a lot of sense is whether taxpayers should be prepared to spend $25 billion to build a wall.
Which is not going to work.
And so, do you use $25 billion to build a symbolic wall, or do you take that money and build infrastructure? Bridges that collapse in Miami, or streets that need repair in Manchester, water purification plants, railroads,
But you have to.
airports.
There's a couple of things here. First of all, to me, Trump picks on whoever is going to be the good soundbite. I don't think it's i.e.
Day-to-day.
Mexican per se. He's looking for the soundbite, like you said, to energize his base. The other thing is, if he gets this wall built, what's this wall going to be called?
The Trump.
This is going to be called the Donald J. Trump wall. He's looking for something that's not quite as big as the size of his ego that he can stick his name on that will survive after he's gone.
You know, it's funny.
You know, this wall, just like the Berlin Wall,
I was just about to bring up the Berlin Wall.
will become a stain on his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
It will persist after he's gone, and it will be a symbol around the world that the United States no longer stands for hope, democracy, freedom, opportunity. And so instead of the symbol of the Statue of Liberty welcoming the poor and the huddled masses, we will have this new and very ugly symbol of the wall on our southern border.
Do you know the Berlin Wall? You could go through in places. There were places you could go through. It wasn't all blocked up. If you could go through and get to the other side and then come back. And I'm not talking even particular skullduggery, but it was rather surprising. Which I'm bringing the point is, this is a country with a long coast. California, unlike the East Coast, there aren't many cities. You could land people anywhere. So it's just a waste of money. In Algeria, the French were going to tried to build a wall with electronic detectors and stuff. It couldn't be done. In Vietnam, we also tried on the border of Laos and stuff to build a wall. It just doesn't work. I don't think any wall in history ever worked. But, yeah, I guess it's political theater.
It's
including attacking your clients. You know, you talk about people that are here, right? They're Americans. They might not be technically a U.S. citizen, but they're Americans.
Well, the other thing is, the people that were on the Obama list of the go-afters, the people that were, repeat offenders, you had that list of what they look for.
The targeted immigrants, yes.
Those were going to be the people that would be better at escaping, hiding. Those would be the people that would take more work to capture, more work to work with. And what they've done is, to support your point that this is just to make the numbers look good, what they're doing is they're going after the easy people who abide by the law, do what it takes, are the kind of people we want in this country to help expand the country. Because let's all face it. I mean, if you asked me to sign a petition right now, I'd put Native Americans back in charge of the country, and we'd all get deported, because none of us were the originals.
That's not true. My mother claimed that she was Native American. Then we went to Ireland.
Yeah.
No ma here.
But this is what they're doing is they're cherry picking the best of the people who we should be fast forwarding to become American citizens, that have shown that they have good work ethic, have bought houses, pay taxes, have businesses, have jobs, things like this, and not be wasting our resources pounding on our chest, because this is just chest pounding.
We only have a certain amount of time, but I think getting back to the lawsuit, because we're just talking politics now, but there are legal protections for immigrants, even undocumented immigrants, are there not, Ambassador?
Well, there is. There are protections, but these protections are still being tested, and they're not fully mature at this point. There are cases being litigated in the federal courts, and so we'll find out as time goes on. Very few of the cases have gone up to the U.S. Supreme Court at this point.
Would the Roberts Court be hostile, or do you know at this point?
Well, it's hard to say whether what the Roberts Court would do. The fear was that if DACA or the Dreamers case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, they might well strike it down. So a legislative remedy is the best remedy. And so one thing people can do, of course, is to speak to Senators Hassan and Shaheen and urge them to move forward on the legislation, to support their efforts on the Dreamers legislation, and likewise our two congresswomen as well. All of them have been very supportive.
We have what about the congressional Republicans seem to be enthralled to Donald Trump.
Well, we have some policies in New Hampshire that are not very immigrant friendly. For example, an immigrant cannot get a driver's license.
That's not like California.
In New Hampshire and California, they can.
Yeah.
And certain other states, they can.
Why you wouldn't want an immigrant to have a driver's license, I don't understand.
A student who's undocumented cannot get a scholarship. They can, however, be admitted to our schools. The law enforcement in New Hampshire is the state police, and I'm not sure about the city of Manchester, honors detainers from the ICE organization to turn over immigrants after they've served a state sentence, maybe on a driving violation, to federal authorities, despite the fact that there is no requirement for them to do so.
Well, like Oakland, the mayor of Oakland has the problem. She's defying ICE, but when you have a president when you have a city like Oakland, California, that's so dependent on federal money, there's a choke point there. How far can you go? I was reading some of the press today.
I think it's time, because we're almost out of time.
Minutes.
Yeah, I think it's time that we deport everybody in this country that belongs to the axis of evil, and we need to define that new axis of evil. That axis of evil is clearly the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the White House.
Oh,
and if we deported all of that from the axis of evil, started over again, and eliminated lobbyists, I think that we might stand a fighting chance to get somewhere.
I'd just go.
I might take a different path on that one, but I sympathize with your sentiment.
Do you know that Trump's mother's an immigrant from Scotland? Yeah.
Well, we all have immigrant roots, don't we?
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
so-
from Scotland, but 1700s, and the English side 1630. Litchfield, that was a grant from George II to my family. And when I ran for county treasurer, but let's not get into that.
Okay, yeah. let's not
They
get into that.
abandoned me.
So
my old hometown.
if somebody is watching this and they
Right.
are an undocumented immigrant,
question.
what would your advice be to them at this point? Come forward, or if nobody knows,
Well,
stay hidden.
there's no incentive to come forward at this point. I would say to understand your rights in our society. We still are a society of law, and that if they are uncertain of their rights, speak to an immigration lawyer.
Is
Okay.
this is
Just
this an itch?
like Ambassador George Bruno.
Yeah. Is this a McCarthy era type witch hunt that we're experiencing now? Would that be a fair comparison?
We'll bring you back on because we have to go right now.
All right. Why don't we
And,
leave it there?
Oh, you're not going to answer the question.
I would like to have you on again because one of the things I had when I said we were going to talk about this, people you wouldn't think would say, oh, sanctuary, this or that, because they really don't think the issue's through. So thank you so much for coming on
It's
and
a pleasure.
helping
Thank you.
help me, and I don't know about crazy Dr. Kelvin, think the issues through. See you next week.
Thank you.